Horizon, an American Saga, is the new film written, directed, and starred by Kevin Costner. Now, this film is basically about old 1800s America, and I'm going to get this out of the way right now. One of the best things I love about this film is, just like most other things nowadays, after Game of Thrones era, it really infused Game of Thrones storytelling into the storytelling of this film. Whereas every scene, shot for shot, is a POV character study. Like Game of Thrones, where it was Eddard, Catelyn, Bran, Jon, Sansa, Arya. This is kind of built the same way, and I really love that. Anything that reminds me of the storytelling of Game of Thrones, I'm gonna love that, just point blank, at least that part. Now, the acting was fine for the most part. There were a couple quirks where some people, like Michael Rooker, at some points in the film tried a tiny bit of an accent and it didn't really land at all. But the acting is fine for the most part. The view of this film, the cinematography, the practical effects, there's a whole shit ton of practical effects in this film. I'm sure they use CGI, but they use a lot of practical effects, and it shows because this film looks great. The story is where this film falters. At the beginning of this film, the intro starts out, spoiler just so you know, basically it's showing you what the Apaches are doing in this world. They basically see any white person, stalk them for a little bit, then murder them. And the intro is exactly that. And then after the intro, it just kind of proceeds onto the story. And then you realize throughout watching this film that scene for scene, none of them really make sense with each other. Honestly, this is a 3-hour film, and like none of it feels meshed with one another. Not a single bit of it. I mean, the intro was only referenced one time in this film from the murder. Otherwise, the intro is non-existent to the entire rest of the film. And you can say that about every other scene in this film. Now, scene for scene, every scene is shot and done phenomenally. That's not my problem. Kevin Costner is a great director. Kevin Costner is a great actor. I have nothing against anything that Kevin Costner filmed for this. Hell, even written. It's written fine. The problem is, none of it really makes sense with each other. Scene for scene. I mean, seriously. You got about a 30-minute chunk at the beginning of the film of the Apaches then invading white land and white buildings and mass murdering all of the whites. And that scene makes sense because it's a continuing 30-minute scene. But then when you go from scene to scene, or even POV to POV, it's confusing as fuck. And it's not even confusing. It's just, I feel like they intentionally pulled things out of the story from this film to kind of make it complex, but really it just doesn't make sense at all. I mean, I get it. I got the gist of all of it, but at the same time, I was thunderstruck. I was like, okay, how the fuck did we get here in this scene? I don't fucking know. They were just showing, okay, they showed this couple in their house talking. And then they went to another POV scene, and then they went back to them like 10 minutes later, and then they were walking back to go to the house, and then these random characters showed up, and maybe I just missed something, but they had this whole ass spiel of a scene where the chick apparently was a runaway from, fuck, I don't even know. Were they her family? I don't fucking know. But they just randomly killed the guy, and then I guess they were taking her, and then that was literally the end of her story, and that was like 55 minutes into this 3-hour behemoth, and that, I don't remember seeing her ever again. I understand that this is going to be a 4-part film series, but for fuck's sake, this was a 3-hour film. Why didn't I see a continuation of her story? Maybe I didn't, I just didn't recognize her. That's the thing. I mean, scene for scene, people tend to not be recognizable. It's really bizarre. I didn't get it. This was the first time this has ever happened to me. Not being able to recognize a certain character. The only character I kept recognizing was Kevin Costner's character. Everybody else, like honestly, I thought there was a time lapse at some point. Because, for example, Lizzie, the little girl, and then Marigold, the woman, they looked so identical. I looked up at one point, I looked at the clock on my phone, and I looked up and I saw Marigold, and I was like, oh, did they go through a time jump? But then they went back to Lizzie's POV, and I'm like, okay, now I'm really fucking confused. Why do they look the same? I don't get it. This film, it's entertaining because it's super ambitious and it's super epic, and I really appreciate that. There's really not a whole lot of violence. It seems like there's a lot of violence from the beginning, but then you have 3 more hours left, and there's really not much violence. There's sporadic violence throughout. There's a giant mass murder scene, and then sporadic violence throughout, peppered throughout. Like once every 20 minutes you get a kick. That's about it. But this film, I don't get it. I didn't get it. I don't have a problem with Westerns, but I have a problem when Westerns are just edited so poorly. And that's maybe the one and only flaw about this film. It's just so poorly edited. It's not cohesive. None of it makes sense with each other. I don't fucking get why they did anything in the form of putting together this film. Why? Why write a story revolving around POV scenes and then make every POV scene not make sense with the next one? I just didn't get any of that. And so overall for me, Horizon and America's Saga Chapter 1 falls down to a 6 out of 10, mainly because it's super incoherent. It doesn't make sense at all. I should have known that from the intro, because the intro happened, and then they continued with completely different characters. And then they never really referenced it whatsoever ever again. And I thought to myself, vaguely, I was like, I hope this is not what this film is going to be about. Putting in sporadic random scenes, and then they just don't make sense. But that's what this ended up being. So overall for me, like I said, this is a 6 out of 10. I just didn't get it. I didn't get it at all. It looks great. It's acted fine. Hell, it's even written fine. The direction is phenomenal. But the editing is shit. None of it makes sense. I mean, you could consider that being a writer's fault, yeah. But then all they would have to do is just add in extra scenes to make it make a lot more sense. So, I mean, the writing's not bad for what we're given. It just doesn't make sense, man. Kevin Costner, what the fuck? 6 out of 10. Thank you.